We've been celebrating Mardi Gras all week on the show by having cool guests on and by generally being fabulous. You're welcome. Tonight is no different. My guest has been speaking at Mardi Gras events this year, discussing her work. She's a striptease artist and award-winning porn star, and it was very difficult to research her on my ABC computer. I think I'm going to be fired tomorrow. She's also an academic who's worked with the UN and is currently getting a PhD in porn regulation. Would you please welcome Zahra Stardust? Hi, Zahra. Happy Mardi Gras.
Happy Mardi Gras. Happy Gay Christmas.
Yes, Gay Christmas indeed. Thank you for being here. Now, it says here, you're an activist for queer and women's rights with an ability to squirt like a fire hydrant.
Well, that's how Jizz Lee announced it when they awarded me Feminist Porn Heartthrob of the Year. They're their words,
Oh, were those
actually.
their words?
But,
Okay, well,
yes,
forgive me.
I will take credit for that.
Yes, congratulations. Now, tell me about that, because there is this myth that female ejaculation doesn't exist, and that is bullshit.
Indeed. In fact, two things happen when you ejaculate. There's the ejaculate, which develops within the Skene's gland, which is in your urethral sponge, but there's also squirting fluid, which develops in the bladder. But they're very different fluids to urine, and they're definitely different fluids to the usual vaginal discharge that you might have. In fact, the ejaculate is more like seminal fluid found in the prostate.
Right. Now, those are the facts. Some people do not know about those facts, and they believe that women ejaculating is the same as women urinating, and that has had a real impact on the kind of porn that we're allowed to view here in Australia. Can you tell us that amazing story?
Absolutely. In Australia, it's actually unlawful to depict any fetish in our X18 category. So if you depict any fetish, it will be refused classification. And there's a list of activities which constitute a fetish, and one of those is golden showers. Very different, as we've said, to ejaculation. However, there have been instances where customs officials, for example, have mistaken ejaculate as being urine, or assumed that perhaps it doesn't exist, or it's a phenomenon that they've never heard of or seen before in these wonderful copious quantities, and have then prohibited porn from then coming in at the border. So what a shame.
Indeed, a great shame.
Yes.
So there's this crazy story about in the 90s, there was a bill to sort of legalise, to make a category that said non-violent erotica, which would include that kind of stuff. And it was being kicked around the Howard government at the time. And at one point, the negotiations about the bill was breaking down. And at the last hour, Senator Brian Harradine held a parliamentary screening of his private collection of sex films to show other parliamentarians what he was talking about. The collection included Buck Angel's Transsexual Adventures, Max Hardcore's Going South, and Black She-Ben. And John Howard at the time was so disgusted, offended by what he saw, or apparently just doesn't believe in female ejaculation. That's why we have the laws we have today.
That's right. And in fact, during the 80s, Fred Nile, in fact, was really instrumental in ensuring that there was a ban on the sale of any kind of X18 plus films. Ironic, seeing as though Fred Nile's staff themselves have been found to be watching pornography on their staff computers, although they did maintain it was for research purposes. But yes, there was a ban on X, and the Eros Association introduced a private members bill saying, okay, if you're not going to legalise X, well, at least you can legalise this category of non-violent erotica. But it in fact backfired, as you mentioned, because of this screening, which who knew? Brian Harradine, who was actually anti-stem cell research, anti-abortion, anti-marriage equality, yet had this proliferation of porn in his collection.
Who have the people got there now? What's their collection like? Anyway, I won't think about that. You said that porn is a really great agent for queer activism. How have you used porn and sexual ideas and sexual things to advance your political agenda?
I think it's really interesting thinking about what kind of bodies are allowed to be depicted in Australia. So, for example, in addition to the prohibitions on fetish, there's also restrictions on what kind of genital detail you can have in adult magazines. So this has led to airbrushing of women's labia, for example, in particular magazines. And I myself have I've opened up Picture magazine and had this conversation with many other strippers when we've opened the magazine in a newsagent and said, that's not my vulva.
Wonderful catchphrase.
Right. So you know, it's always been of interest to me, the ways in which our bodies are regulated and what can be depicted or not. And so I've kind of made a point of using my body as a canvas, I suppose, to explore that. I've made perfume
yes.
out of my ejaculate. I called it eau de vagine. I had some nice floral, heady essences to go with it. I've done labia prints. I've made a film with Courtney Trouble, which we called Femme Facial, which was to subvert that traditional idea of the male cum shot. But there's also very literal examples of protest in the UK. There was a bill introduced whereby face sitting was no longer able to be depicted in video on demand pornography, but yet fellatio was. And so the criticism was that this was a very sexist, introduction. And so hundreds of people gathered in London as part of a face sitting protest.
Wonderful. My mum and dad watch this show, Zahra. But no, thank you so much for being
Mum
here.
and Dad.
Yes, hi, Mum and Dad. Hi, it's all lies. I'm waiting for that girl. Thank you for being here. You're going to be in the parade at Mardi Gras this weekend. People can check that out. SBS is covering it. You can check out their coverage for the whole thing. Thank you very much for being our guest tonight. Zahra Stardust, ladies and gentlemen.